Welcome to One Way to Machines and the Volvo P1 Series. In this video, we will be addressing the wet carpets on this Volvo V50. The single most important part of this video is to watch it the whole way through, as the video is progressive. There are going to be parts that are very difficult to film, and you might not understand and get confused, but what they will do in the end when everything is clarified is that you are going to avoid certain things when you're doing your testing possibly. The main issue is wet carpets and a slightly moldy smell after any kind of rainfall. The wet carpets are only in the front driver and passenger footwell. Another visible symptom that is most likely related to this issue is the buildup of moisture on this side of the windshield. After any kind of rainfall, or if you come out on a cold day, this whole side will be fogged up from the inside. Another intermittent issue that this car has had recently is that the power locks won't work when you control them from the passenger door. The passenger side front window sometimes does go up and down, sometimes it doesn't. If you play around with it, turn the key on and off, then sometimes you can get it to go up from the driver's side. This is possible that all of this mold over time has caused these grounds to become corroded or temporarily not working, because right now they're working again. But you will have to wait for part 2 of this series to see that if the fixes that we've done have any effect on these electrical functions or any other functions of the car. In terms of tools, you don't need too much for this job. For the handicap handles on the roof liner, either a small flathead screwdriver or a right angle pick just to get the plastic covers off. And then in this case, this car had 8mm bolts. This is overkill, but I couldn't find my 3/8 or 1/4 inch ratchet. So all you need is about 3 inches of extension and an 8mm in order to crack those loose. In terms of the sun visor, there's a plastic clip that you need to tug down on. It takes a little more force than you would think, and then you're going to rotate it 90 degrees, and then it's going to expose these two little Phillips screws, and just use a small screwdriver to take them out and then gently pull it out. At this point, you can either physically unhook the electrical connector for the lights in the mirror, or you can just clip the mirror and leave it there. In my case, whether it was for filming or if all of you should do it, it eventually fell off the electrical connector, so maybe it's better to take it off completely, set it to the side, so you have no problem. The only thing I really do urge on this job is because it's not an outside of the car mechanic job, you're inside. And dirty fingers, wearing gloves, if you've touched anything else with them, it's going to stain your headliner and then you're going to have a detail job on your hands. So anytime you get inside and you start touching the visor or the A-pillars or anything, take your gloves off, make sure your hands are clean, and just use your bare hands to do those parts. You're best off just leaving these 4 screws inside of the cup holder in the car so that you don't lose them when you go back for reinstall. These tools also, you're going to be a little frustrated when you do this job possibly, and these can scratch stuff up inside the car, the dash, the leather, everything. So make sure to keep these tools outside the car, just have a good eye on them. And if you have those T-Tech seats, those things crack and tear anyways, so really avoid putting anything on those chairs. Here we have the interior parts that you're going to take off. We'll go inside the car to show some of them in more detail. Pieces though like the sunroof trim, you just pry it back gently with your clean hands, and then you just work it around and it comes back off. All of these things are best stored in the back seat of the car, so just put them gently in the back until you go to reinstall them so that they don't get dirty. In terms of the A-pillars, it's up to you if you like this thing or not. The Volvo puts these on their car so you can put stuff like parking passes and stuff on the windshield. I think it's just always in the way and it's a cheap looking piece of plastic when you're driving, so I'm going to remove it from this car. The needle nose pliers here are for the part where you come to take the A-pillars off. There's these plastic safety tethers for when the airbags deploy to hold the A-pillar in place, and you want to gently go in from the back, squeeze them together, and then pull it off of the slide tab. We'll go inside the car and I'll show you this. So this is the A-pillar tether here. You see it's attached. What you're going to do is squeeze in on these two tabs with needle nose pliers. They go together, and then you pull it out of the A-pillar like that. As you set your needle nose pliers down, make sure not to take a chunk out of your leather. This will be a little bit finicky because you're going to be holding the A-pillar with one hand and trying to get your pliers in with the other. So just have patience, but you will eventually squeeze it together and get it out this way. In terms of the A-pillar covers, this job is a good time to detail them, as you won't be able to get good enough angles when it's inside of the car. All you're going to want is a quality interior detailer and a microfiber towel, and you want to rub in and get any of the grime out of the A-pillars before you reinstall them. Here's the connection for the visor. The actual handicap handle, once you remove the screws, it doesn't come all the way out. It stays with the headliner. Once you've got these loose and the sunroof trim off, right here, you just gently pry this down as you're working to give you the room you need. Okay, you don't have to fully take off the headliner. Now this little bit of water staining here, I can't tell, it most likely was not there when I started this. I'm shooting these clips after the actual process videos, and you will see that we did get a significant amount of water coming down in this area. So this is not clear if this was there before or if this happened during testing. But do keep an eye out for any kind of water staining on the headliner, as this could possibly be a point of reference for you as to where your problem is. This staining is not very visible when it's not under direct light like this, but in order to clean it up, you just need to use some strong interior detailer and some microfiber towels, and you'll eventually get it out. The first piece you're going to remove is this plastic piece, and you want to put your two fingers in the bottom. If you put it in the top, you're going to tear this rubber. So put them in the bottom, and you're going to pull straight out. There's two tabs, just like this. Next, you want to remove this trim piece here. This one is simple. You just grab underneath and tug up with firm, even force. And there's one more tab here. You just have to play with these. You probably won't break any of the tabs. They'll come out just fine. Once you've got all of these out of the way, it gives you more access to see what's really going on underneath in terms of any kind of water buildup and what you can feel. This car has a little bit of mold up here on the top sections on both sides. So we need to see if we can solve the water issue, and then we're going to monitor these and see once they've dried out if anything comes back or if they dry out over time. So in this area here, there's a little bit of mold inside of the foam underneath the carpet. So now we're zoomed in here. You can see the darkened areas where there's a bit of mold from the water buildup and possibly moisture working its way up back from underneath the carpets. So we've got this on both sides. Let's go take a look at the other side. So as you can see on this side, there's not really that much mold. Can't even see much of it. But there are wiring bundles here, which makes this water repair very important to do. And just putting a brick on it for me has helped to allow some of the moisture to get out. But removing these trim pieces is the same on this side as it was on the other. Alright, so I was showing you the more optimistic part of the carpets. There's a better look at the wires. I forgot that it was actually in here. Okay, this is where the water runs down. So as you can see, all the staining in here, right here, all of this darker stuff, that's mold. And down here you can still see that it's got some moisture left over. So inside here, this metal area, as you're doing your tests, is going to show the moisture and possibly water quite well. For me, it was just moisture, because as you watch the video, you're going to see the issue for this car was a bit more complex. It wasn't that basic. But to have this area be fully dry before you start your tests is a good thing. As soon as I pulled this carpet back, though, there was moisture on this metal panel here. That's the easiest place you'll see it. Now at the front here, if I were not videotaping this job, I wouldn't have removed a lot of these things. And a lot of you should take note of this stuff because you can avoid a lot of work possibly if you watch this whole video throughout. So in the case that you want to diagnose this water leak, you see over here I've taken the fender liners and the wheels off. You don't need to do any of this. I've just done this for filming purposes, which will be evident later in the video. All you need to really do, okay, is right down here inside of the fender liner where it would be, the water actually escapes from under the fender liner. So you watch the puddles you'll see in the video later, and as long as you see that much water spilling onto the ground, you don't need to remove either this or the trim underneath the windshield. You can just go by using this as a judgment of, yes, the water is coming out from here. In the case that I were to do this again, even if you have to blow some compressed air through that small piece to get it to come through, you can just leave that dirt and debris in there and then do all the other fixes that you see in the video. If you do want more visual reference though, this plastic piece under the windshield can come out. It's held in by two plastic half screws, so you just undo these halfway. Then a little bit further down, you're going to have these plastic pull rivet things. You just use a trim tool or two screwdrivers to get them out. There's 1 and 2. And when you go to fully remove it, you want to pull it away from the windshield. So down. I'm going to flip it over to show you the tabs underneath. So here are the clips on the other side. You just want to be mindful when you're taking it out. Before you can get this plastic piece out, you need to remove the wiper arms. So just pry off these caps with a little screwdriver. And then there's two 10mm nuts. Just use a socket and a 10mm on them. When you come to remove the actual wiper arms, just make sure to see what their orientation on the actual windshield is so that you put them back relatively in the same spot. And if you've worked on a lot of cars, you know that these things can be a huge pain. Luckily, Volvo has made the design very simple. At first, they won't come up. Just go back and forth with them a little bit and pull up and they'll come right off. They have a small spline section, so when you do put them back, just play with it a little bit until it goes back into place. If you do end up taking this stuff off, you can store it in a small Tupperware container. I've taken off more than most of you will. Try to keep the interior stuff inside of the car though, keep them separate. You also do not need to raise the car or remove the wheel. Okay, so now we're looking inside of the headliner here. As you can see, there's a bunch of wiring here, which you also don't want to get water on. Right up there, you can see the sunroof tubing. So we're going to try to pour some water in there and see where it's actually leaking from. So you can see here, after a lot of testing, the rear sunroof drain is activated, although this is also due in part to the fact that I've raised the car. because I've removed the fender liner so that you guys can see better in there. But you can see the front puddle there. It's got a little driplets coming from it and a puddle of water, but it's nowhere close to the other side still. So now we're going to come in from a different angle over here. As in the video, it seems like it's not even the lines that are leaking. It's possibly a plastic crack in the actual tray up there. So we'll pour some more water, zooming in on this angle, and see what happens. So as you saw there, everything was fine there. So we're going to try to move the camera a bit further down the line now and see if we can find the spot. Nothing from this location either. As you can see, the drip is still occurring. So we're gonna have to look a little bit harder for this one. Let's try this one again. So you see it's coming down from here. None of the lines had any issue of any leaks in this area. We have to look even further. Here's the seat after about 5 rounds of testing just today. So jacking the car up seems to be the problem here. Maybe it's not. When I poured the water in and looked in at it from the top, what was happening was the water level would rise up to a certain point, and then it was coming up from here and going into the headliner. So it has no issue with the tubes. Now what we have to do is put the car back on the ground and try this test again. But what's odd about this is even with the slight incline that this car is on, if somebody has a driveway that's pitched upwards towards their house, this should be a design flaw on Volvo's part, that it cannot drain the water and that it overflows over the ledges and goes into the headliner. So once we put the car down, we'll know more about this. This is actually an important part, so I'm actually going to pour water again so that you guys can see what I'm talking about that's happening. Right here. Right here. All right, so finally, after a million angles, it's actually leaking in from the point where these metal guide tabs go into the plastic. So I'll try to get a filming shot of that now. All right, so this is where it came out from this time. So here we are at that metal guide tab for the flexing wind portion on the top of the sunroof. It seems to be leaking a little bit differently every single time I do it. So you just got to test it many times until you find the spot on the leak on yours. You can see it's leaking from there. Some of it's coming down from the rear sunroof drain. And some of it's coming down from the front all at the same time. So troubleshooting this, and see, look across there, you can even see it coming out of the driver's side when too much gets into this one. So this could be a combination of clogging, badly sealing metal on that sunroof windscreen, all kinds of things, but we'll get to the bottom of it. Don't let your sunroof dangle like that. You can clip it into the other side while you're doing these tests. By the time I've done all these filming shots though, it kind of just dropped down. So it's not a big deal, but you can clip it up there. So here we are looking at a top view on the metal guide tab. If you look in closely, you can't really see because this one's flooded, but we'll go on the other side. There is a small gap between this. Now Volvo should have made this fail-safe, as if one of the drains clogs and the water comes up here, it should not be able to escape past these and go into the interior. But that's what happens here. Now we'll go over to the driver's side and I'll show you that the same gaps exist, but the channels for the rear sunroof drain and the front ones are all lower than this point. So because they're not clogged on that side, this design flaw not being fail-safe is not having any effect on that side, but it is having the effect on this side. So this issue most likely is a clogged line. We'll have to find out where the clog is. So just because you see the water coming from up here doesn't mean that your line isn't clogged up closer up, the actual line. Alright, so here we are on the driver's side. You can see those gaps I'm talking about better here on this side because it's completely dry with no dirt. But you see this side isn't clogged. Everything goes straight down that front drain. And then the rear sunroof channel is way down there. So if there's too much water in the front, it starts going underneath there. If that front channel is clogged, as it is on that side, the passenger side, what's going to happen is some of the water will make it to the back there, and some of it's going to lift up and come here. It's also possible that on that side, both the path to the rear sunroof drain and the front one have partial clogs, which is allowing it to come up here. So Volvo saw this as a third point and they didn't fail-safe it. We're only going to find out when we pull the line on the other side, and then if we still get water, we're going to have to check the passage inside of here to see what's going on with the rear sunroof drain. Because as you've seen in previous clips, the rear sunroof drain on the passenger side is actually draining quite well and consistently when water is going in. So our next step is going to be that front line, replacing it on the passenger side. So here's the line that I pulled from the front passenger A-pillar. Somebody's already been in here. As you can see, that piece of duct tape there. The line is actually completely clean. So there is this grommet at the end, which people complain about breaking, but that grommet being broken here, still, that's a solid pipe. So the other end that it goes into may have an issue, but now we're going to have to test through the actual top, which will pour some water. And for the rest, it's completely, you can't see anything. So I'm going to have to use some compressed air and see if we shoot anything outside of there. Here's the other small piece. I'm going to pour some water through it to see if it's clogged inside of that solid piece there. This piece also checked out completely fine. Now, after about 10 minutes, you can see some water starting to trickle out of the line. In the engine bay here, on the passenger side, this is why it's really important to wait until everything is fully dry on the car, as this area was completely moist the first few times I did this test. Then I let the car sit for 2 days, and I came back when it's dry. So you can see that this tube has partially failed. Sometimes it lets the water down, and sometimes it drains from inside of the A-pillar like you saw in the previous clip. This here is again after about 15 minutes. Now you're seeing some water on this side. But let's walk over to the other side and we can compare it to how much water has trickled out of here. It's not a trickle, it's completely pouring out of this drain. See, here's the driver's side. And you can see just a little puddle underneath there on the other side. I've just poured water in there, and as you can see, there's just a little drip coming out. And just to keep it uncut so you guys can see the most, going back up here right now, here's what happened this time when I went into the sunroof to pour water in. It's different every time, which is why you need to try this multiple times, and why the first time you might not get the whole repair done. When I poured the water into the passenger side corner, it started traveling along the top, and it goes over to the other side. As you saw in previous clips, the water was dripping down from the A-pillar here. This time it did not drip one single drop, which is why you have to do a bunch of tests over a few days until you get one spot where you have consistent enough leaks that you can say, okay, I'm going to change this side drain line, or it's possibly the windshield. After today's round of testing, which I would say is probably about the 5th or 6th time that I've tested for both the windshield and the drain lines, you can see on the driver's side we have a nice puddle and a consistent stream of water going down to the garage. As we come across here, don't mind the oil stains, those are from a different car. As we come here, you can see on this side we finally got a small puddle of just dripping water, but it's nowhere close to as open as the sunroof drain on the other side. So now that we've got the lines removed, here's the bottom of the door sill on the passenger side. We're moving into this area up here. Alright, so with the camera on an angle is the only way I can show you this. But look down there, you can see that pipe. See that gray piece of plastic in the center of the screen? Follow it all the way down towards the hood, and you'll see that entrance point where that plastic tubing goes in. I'm going to blow compressed air through here, and we're going to set up the camera on the other side and look and see if anything comes out of there. Make sure to wear safety glasses, as on the first blast that I put compressed air in there, I got some sand in my eye. So the compressor that I'm using is just this small $200 compressor. I'll zoom in on the specs here for those of you that might want to buy it, because you don't need anything crazy. I just use this one for smaller projects. What I am using though is you got to get a 4-inch small handle, and you have to get an air line and all the couplers. If you want more detailed stuff, I pretty much covered everything, but you can watch the Carbon Clean Part 2 series for the Audi RS4, and there's more information about this compressor there. So even with the compressed air and the video, it's hard to tell how much got blasted out of that line. So now that we know our sunroof lines are actually not blocked, I'm going to reinstall it, and we're going to do the water test one more time, pouring it into the sunroof drain. So before even doing a water test, upon reinstalling the stock tubing, the largest part of tube actually did not even go inside of the rubber end on the other side. So we're going to buy a larger piece of 3/8 tube and put that in there, and hopefully that resolves the issue. So there's no point in doing a water test, but I'll take you inside to show you that everything is clipped in all the way fully, and that piece of tube is just a couple millimeters dangling away. So we're going to measure that and just replace that part there. So we're on an angle here again, as it's hard to get the camera in, but that 3/8 end where you see that rubbery piece on the 3/8 hose, it joins into that little rubber piece that goes into the firewall there. You can see there that lip is supposed to be matched up with that plastic piece there that goes into the firewall, and it's not. And everything else is clipped in and pushed in fully. I also can't get angles on that for you, but you can see that the design flaw is actually with the size of this 3/8 tubing, and we're going to replace it and then do a water test again. So what's happening in that area down there, amongst the terrible failsafe that Volvo has at the top with the sunroof, is that that water is leaking just a little bit in that gap in between the two, which is why this one was hard to diagnose. Because sometimes, as you saw, we would get water coming out of the front sunroof drain, but that was only because when the flow of water was enough, it would be able to jump that gap to a degree. But for the most part, it can't, and that water just seeps and goes under the carpet from that small gap that we had there. Before we buy the 3/8 line, we're actually going to do one more test with the air compressor. We are going to go inside of here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this line here and blow air straight into the actual plastic portion of the sunroof piece here to make sure that that little passageway between the actual drain hole and this first piece of pipe is not clogged. The hole at the top there is very small, and you likely won't see it inside of any of the video, but I'll try to videotape it anyways. Don't mind the light. It was almost impossible to focus on this hole. It's smaller than the end of the tip of a pencil. We're looking into the actual sunroof drain on the passenger side here. So I'm going to blow compressed air backwards through this and see what happens. And as you can see, we'll go just a little bit further down. Due to the near impossibility to film this, I've actually unplugged that side, and I'm going to try filming from here. I'll put the compressed air in from the top, and we'll see if anything blows out underneath the headliner here. If you do end up doing it from the top, this is the only angle that your little air gun can fit into that hole. And you probably want to do it from here so that you can visibly see if you got dirt out, as this will be nicer for your troubleshooting. So now let's blow some air through it and see what happens. So as you saw there, that passageway is also clear. This might not happen to you because you won't be filming, but the visor eventually fell down by itself as the electrical connector disconnected itself. So either disconnect the electrical connector or be very careful around it. As mentioned before, the right side can stay clipped in as you're doing this work. But from what it looks like, just take the electrical connector out and make it easier for yourself. This job's already quite a headache. So here's the old piece of hose that runs down the A-pillar on the passenger side. If you're doing this for yourself, you might want to replace the entire length right up to the sunroof drain with new line. I'm only doing this segment because it's the problematic one possibly, and because I want to leave as much stock intact on this car to have possibly even more failures, because the purpose of this car is to help you guys on the channel to see where the failure points on this car can be. So if it's going to leak from another fitting, we want it to on this car. So this line here is 75 centimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the new line maybe at 76 centimeters, 76 and a half, so that it has a little bit more going into that plastic piece, going into the firewall, and we'll see how that does. The new line is 3/8 inner diameter, 1/2 inch outer diameter, and that's 10 feet's worth. It was only about $7 or $8. You can get it from any local hardware store, and just use an Olfa knife, X-Acto knife to cut it to length. Drag your hand along both pipes, holding them together to make sure that the new one is just slightly longer. This one ended up being maybe 1/2 centimeter longer than the old one. So as you can see down there, the first piece I cut was too short. You can see in the center of your screen where I've scored the new tube. I just followed my hand down, making them equal length, and then I scored it slightly further down, and that's how much longer the new piece is going to be cut. Here is the old tube. Now with the new one installed, we're going to do another water test and see how it does. Based on the evidence, As you can see here on the floor now, we have water running consistently from the front drain. Now that we had success with this, I'm going to put the car back together as is and leave it outside in the rain and see if we get anything coming back. I will wash all the carpets and make sure they're dry so that our test is correct. The only thing that I'm a bit skeptical about here is the fact that underneath the actual carpets, there is a little bit of mold at the top sections, both on the passenger side and the driver's side. And that might mean that we have another issue on the other side, but that'll only be for the next part of the series. The issue here seemed to be that the old pipe is defectively short from the factory, causing it to jump out of that rubber piece that comes into the firewall. Extending that by a little bit is what solved the problem. This line in front of you at the top of your screen was not clogged in any way, as you saw in the tests that we performed. So slightly longer line, fit in, and it won't jump out. Water flowed clean through. The small amount of mold that I'm talking about might just be the water that had gone in from this faulty line into the underneath the carpets, and then eventually when that moisture had tried to escape from underneath, those higher parts of the foam are the ones that soaked a lot of water for a long time, and that's why there's a bit of mold. We'll do one final test blowing compressed air through the old line here. It might look like it's really dirty, but it just has some particles on the outer walls. When you're up close, you can see that it's actually quite clear inside. This tube did not have any restriction of water flow. There were no cracks or any kind of leaks where the duct tape was, so it's unknown why somebody had put that on there before. Maybe to tape a wire to it or something. So there's maybe just a few dust particles inside of that jar. There's no issue with this line, but one of the conclusions of this job is going to be that this line from the factory is too short. Now we'll go over other possible things that could have occurred. So here we are back on the passenger side drain. The most likely cause in this job here was the fact that when we blew compressed air through that little piece that goes between the interior and the firewall here, that debris was clogging things up. It also could be a combination factor of the fact that that was clogged and that main line going down the A-pillar was also too short and allowing some water to escape past its connection point. And that water was escaping behind the dash and then going underneath the carpets. Based on everything that occurred throughout the job, I would say that it's definitely a combination between the line and it being clogged. The main thing here, the main takeaway though for you guys is just go ahead and change that 3/8 line and you should be fine. You should also run tests if you have a garage in space to make sure that the leak isn't from somewhere else. But we will keep this car and not fix everything all at once, so that we can identify possible other failure points in the future for water getting inside the car. One reason that we will do this is because windscreens fail on Volvos of these era too. So pulling the A-pillars is definitely necessary for any testing that you're doing, as when I pulled the A-pillars on this, I was able to get a very good idea of the bead on the actual polyurethane that seats around the windshield. And when you look right inside with the flashlight, it was all intact, so the windshield could be ruled out on this one, at least for this repair. In terms of testing for the windshield, before you even get to the sunroof, you can just pour water starting all around the windshield with the A-pillars pulled off and look inside the car and see if anything's leaking inside. That way you can isolate the sunroof from the windshield.